Emily and Michael had always been a couple admired by their friends and family. Both in their early 30s, they had met during their college years and quickly realized they were soulmates. Michael, a software engineer with a calm and analytical demeanor, had always found balance in Emily's vibrant personality. She was an elementary school teacher, known for her warmth, compassion, and infectious laugh. Together, they built a relationship filled with love, mutual respect, and shared dreams. The two lived in a cozy, modest home in a quiet suburban neighborhood just outside of Seattle. Their house, painted a soft blue with white shutters, stood as a symbol of their carefully crafted life together. Inside, the atmosphere was always warm, with the scent of freshly brewed coffee and framed pictures of their travels lining the walls. For years, Emily and Michael had spoken about starting a family. It wasn't a rushed decision. They both wanted to wait until they were emotionally and financially ready. Every time they'd see friends with kids, there'd be a glimmer in their eyes as they imagined themselves in that role. Michael often joked about how Emily would make an amazing mother, while she teased him about how his patience would be tested. The anticipation of becoming parents grew stronger over time. They spent long evenings talking about how they'd raise their child, how they'd introduce them to their passions, hiking in the mountains, road trips to the coast, and evenings reading by the fireplace. Their discussions about the future were full of hope and excitement. But life, as they would soon learn, has a way of throwing unexpected challenges their way. Though they had been through ups and downs, nothing had prepared them for the emotional journey they were about to embark on when the dream of becoming parents took a twist neither of them saw coming. It was an ordinary Saturday morning when Emily felt a sudden wave of nausea while making breakfast. At first, she brushed it off as a stomach bug, but deep down, something felt different. The idea of being pregnant had been lingering in her mind for weeks, but she didn't want to get her hopes up too soon. After all, they had been trying for a while, and each month that passed without a positive test had brought its share of disappointment. That afternoon, while Michael was out running errands, Emily decided to take a pregnancy test. She stood in the bathroom, heart pounding, as she waited for the result to appear. 2 pink lines slowly formed, and in that moment, her world shifted. Tears welled up in her eyes as the realization hit her. She was going to be a mother. When Michael returned home, Emily could barely contain her excitement. She had rehearsed how she would tell him 100 times. But all that planning flew out the window as soon as she saw him walk through the door. With trembling hands, she handed him a small gift box. Confused, Michael opened it to find a tiny pair of baby shoes and the positive pregnancy test underneath. His reaction was instant. "Are you serious?" he asked, his voice filled with disbelief and joy. Emily nodded, tears streaming down her face. Michael pulled her into a tight embrace, both of them laughing and crying at the same time. For the next few hours, they talked about what their lives would look like now. Michael gently placed his hand on Emily's stomach, even though the baby was still too small to feel. "Our little one," he whispered softly, as if the baby could already hear him. They spent the rest of the evening dreaming about the future, planning how they would break the news to their families, and imagining what it would be like to hold their child for the first time. At that moment, everything felt perfect, but life, as it often does, had other plans, ones that neither of them could have anticipated. The weeks following the pregnancy announcement were filled with excitement and preparations. Emily and Michael dove headfirst into the whirlwind of getting ready for their new arrival. Their evenings were now spent browsing baby stores and online forums, debating over the perfect crib, stroller, and all the tiny clothes that made them smile just thinking about their future child. Emily, being the planner, had a list for everything: names, colors for the nursery, and even future daycare options. She meticulously selected pastel tones for the baby's room, soft shades of yellow and green that would create a warm, welcoming environment. Michael, though not as detail-oriented, happily helped paint the nursery and assemble furniture, his excitement building with every stroke of the brush and turn of the screwdriver. Their families were equally enthusiastic. Emily's parents were thrilled to finally become grandparents, constantly sending baby name suggestions and volunteering to help with anything they could. Michael's mother was particularly emotional, sending hand-knit baby blankets and reminiscing about when Michael was a baby himself. It was as if their entire community was preparing for the baby, offering advice, hand-me-downs, and all the warmth that came with bringing a new life into the world. The couple's conversations became centered around the future. "What do you think our baby will look like?" Emily asked one night as they lay in bed, her head resting on Michael's chest. "I hope they have your eyes," Michael responded, smiling as he imagined a little girl with Emily's big, expressive brown eyes. "And your patience," Emily joked. They spoke about what kind of parents they wanted to be: loving, supportive, and always present. They imagined family hikes, weekends at the beach, and bedtime stories that would last a little too long because neither of them would want the moment to end. As the months passed, their house transformed. The once empty spare room was now a beautiful nursery, complete with a rocking chair, crib, and shelves full of baby books. The couple's anticipation grew stronger with each passing day, as did the bond between them. They were ready. They had planned for everything, or so they thought. But as the due date approached, a feeling of anxiety started to creep in. They couldn't shake the sense that life doesn't always go as planned, and soon enough, they would come face to face with a reality neither of them expected. The day had finally arrived. Emily's contractions had started in the early hours of the morning, and by the time they reached the hospital, the pain was intensifying. Michael stayed by her side the entire time, holding her hand, whispering reassurances, and reminding her to breathe. The hospital room was sterile, yet comforting in its own way. Soft lighting and the gentle hum of machines filled the space, creating an atmosphere that was both tense and full of expectation. After hours of labor, the moment they had been waiting for was here. Emily, exhausted and drenched in sweat, pushed one last time. The cry of their newborn echoed through the room, and immediately, both Emily and Michael were overwhelmed with emotion. Tears filled their eyes as they heard their child for the first time. Michael kissed Emily's forehead, both of them grateful that their baby had arrived safely. But as the nurses gently cleaned the baby and brought it over to Emily, a noticeable tension filled the room. Michael's smile faltered for a brief moment. He stared at the baby, his breath catching in his throat. The baby's skin was unexpectedly pale, almost shockingly light, far from what either of them had anticipated. Both Emily and Michael were of mixed heritage, with warm brown skin tones, and they had expected their child to look similar. But the baby, though beautiful, appeared strikingly different from them. Michael tried to shake off the feeling of confusion. She's beautiful," he said softly, but his voice lacked its usual warmth. Emily, still in the afterglow of childbirth, didn't seem to notice his hesitation. She smiled through her tears as the nurse placed the baby on her chest. "Hi, baby girl," she whispered lovingly, kissing the top of their daughter's head. "We've been waiting for you." But as Michael looked at his daughter, doubt gnawed at him. His mind raced with unspoken questions. Why did she look so different? He didn't want to believe that something was wrong, but the thought lingered in the back of his mind, creating a quiet storm of emotions. He stayed silent, his heart torn between the love he felt for his newborn and the unsettling confusion rising inside him. As Emily cradled their daughter, Michael's eyes remained fixed on the baby, his heart heavy with questions he didn't yet know how to ask. The ride home from the hospital was quiet, far quieter than either of them had expected. Emily, still recovering from the delivery, sat in the back seat with their newborn daughter nestled in her arms. She hummed softly, lost in the glow of new motherhood. But Michael's mind was racing. He gripped the steering wheel tighter than usual, his thoughts a chaotic swirl of emotions. Once they were home, the initial excitement of introducing the baby to their carefully prepared nursery faded into an uncomfortable silence. Michael couldn't take his eyes off their daughter. She was perfect in every way, yet something still gnawed at him. Her light skin, her delicate features, so different from their own. The doubt, once a whisper in the back of his mind, had grown into an echo he couldn't ignore. Later that evening, as Emily rocked the baby to sleep, Michael sat on the edge of their bed, staring at the floor. He had been quiet all day, and Emily, sensing something was off, finally spoke up. "Is everything okay, Michael? You've barely said a word since we left the hospital." Michael hesitated. How could he say what he was thinking without hurting her? His heart pounded as he tried to find the right words. "Emily," I don't know how to say this, but something doesn't feel right. Emily's eyes widened in confusion. What do you mean? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper, sensing the gravity of his tone. The baby, she doesn't look like either of us. I mean, look at her, Emily. She's so different, Michael said, his voice breaking slightly. I can't shake the feeling that something's off. Why is she so pale? I don't understand. Emily's face fell. Michael, are you questioning if she's yours? The hurt in her voice was palpable, but there was a defensive edge to her words. I don't know what to think, Michael admitted, his eyes filled with tears. I'm sorry, I don't want to accuse you of anything, but how can this be possible? For a moment, the room was filled with nothing but the sound of their daughter's soft breathing. Emily stood frozen, the weight of his words sinking in. Tears welled up in her eyes, but she fought them back. I can't believe you would think that. After everything, Michael, how could you? I don't know what else to think. Michael's voice rose, filled with frustration and confusion. I want to believe you, but how do I explain this? Emily placed their daughter gently in the crib, her hands shaking. She turned to face him, her voice trembling but firm. You think I've been unfaithful? That I would lie to you about our child? Michael looked down, ashamed. I don't know what to believe right now. In that moment, their relationship, once so strong and filled with love, was strained under the weight of doubt. Both of them stood in the nursery, surrounded by the very things they had lovingly prepared together, now feeling worlds apart. The tension between them was palpable, and neither of them knew how to move forward. The tension from Michael's words hung in the air like a thick cloud, unshakable and suffocating. Emily stood there, silent for a long time, her mind racing. How could the man she loved, the father of her child, doubt her? Her chest tightened, and she felt an overwhelming wave of betrayal. But at the same time, she could see the confusion in Michael's eyes, the pain in his voice. This wasn't just about mistrust. It was about something deeper, something that neither of them had ever faced before. Later that evening, once their daughter had finally fallen asleep, Emily and Michael sat in the living room, the glow from a single lamp casting long shadows on the walls. The air between them was heavy. Emily, still feeling the sting of Michael's doubts, took a deep breath and broke the silence. You need to say what's on your mind, Michael. All of it. Michael's hands fidgeted nervously. He hated this. Hated feeling like the bad guy. Hated questioning the integrity of their marriage. But the confusion had only grown since they had returned home, and he couldn't keep it bottled up any longer. Emily, I know this sounds crazy, he started, his voice hoarse. But the baby, she doesn't look like us. People are going to notice. What if there's something you're not telling me? Something I don't know? Emily's heart sank. What are you trying to say? That I cheated on you? Her voice trembled, a mixture of anger and hurt. I don't want to think that. Michael's voice cracked. But how else am I supposed to explain this? Look at her, Emily. How can she be ours and look so different? It's not about her skin or her hair. I just don't know what to believe anymore. Tears streamed down Emily's face, but this time they weren't tears of joy. They were tears of frustration, of betrayal. Michael, how could you? She whispered, her voice breaking. I've never given you a reason to doubt me. Not once. And yet, here we are. Our daughter is barely a day old, and you're questioning whether she's even yours. Michael closed his eyes, his face contorted with guilt. I don't want to doubt you. I love you, Emily. I love our family, but I can't shake this feeling. What if there's something genetic? Something you never told me about? Emily's heart skipped a beat. She hadn't thought about that in years. Her family's history wasn't something she had ever hidden, but it wasn't something she had dwelled on either. Her grandfather, born in a small village in northern Europe, had been strikingly fair-skinned. The trait had skipped generations, and in the chaos of pregnancy, she hadn't even considered it. But now, as Michael's words sunk in, it all made sense. Taking a deep breath, Emily began, Michael, there's something I haven't really talked about, because I didn't think it was important. My grandfather, he was very light-skinned. My mom used to joke about how it skipped our generation, but I never thought about it affecting our children. She paused, looking at Michael, hoping he would understand. It's genetic, Michael. Our daughter. She looks like my grandfather. Michael's eyes softened, but the weight of his earlier doubts still clung to him. I didn't know, he muttered, the shame of his suspicion flooding his mind. Why didn't you tell me? I didn't think it mattered, Emily replied, her voice shaking. I didn't know this would happen. But Michael, that doesn't change the fact that you didn't trust me. There it was, the raw truth between them. Michael's doubts had come from a place of fear, but they had cut deep. Emily's revelation should have brought him relief, but instead, it left him feeling more conflicted than ever. The trust between them had been shaken, and despite Emily's explanation, Michael knew that repairing it would take time. They sat in silence, both reeling from the emotional storm that had passed, unsure of where they stood or how to move forward. The truth was out, but the damage had been done. The revelation of Emily's family history had cleared some of the immediate confusion, but the emotional fallout still lingered heavily between them. The days following the confrontation were filled with tense silences and awkward interactions, as both Emily and Michael tried to process what had been said. Though Emily had explained the genetic link, Michael's earlier doubts had left a wound in their relationship that wasn't easily healed. One evening, a week after the baby's birth, Michael finally decided to break the silence. They sat on the couch, their daughter sleeping soundly in her bassinet nearby. I've been thinking, Michael began, his voice soft but serious. About what you told me. About your grandfather. Emily nodded, feeling a mix of relief and apprehension. I'm glad, she replied cautiously. I know it wasn't something I thought would come up, but now that we know. Michael interrupted, his voice tinged with regret. I shouldn't have doubted you, Em. I was scared and confused, but that doesn't excuse how I reacted. I've been trying to figure out why I felt the way I did, and I think it's more than just how she looks. Emily turned to him, her expression softened by his admission but still guarded. What do you mean? Michael sighed, running a hand through his hair. It's not just about her appearance. I think I was afraid of the unknown. I've always been someone who needs answers, who needs things to make sense. When she was born and looked so different from what I expected, it threw me. And instead of trusting you, I let fear take over. Emily's heart ached hearing this. She had always known Michael to be a logical thinker, someone who liked having control over situations. But she had never imagined that fear of the unknown could lead him to question their relationship so deeply. I wish you had just talked to me, she said softly, instead of keeping it all inside until it exploded like that. I know, Michael admitted, looking down at his hands. I should have, but there's more I need to tell you. He hesitated, his face tense with unease. Emily felt a knot form in her stomach. What is it? Michael looked at her, his eyes heavy with guilt. I've been scared about being a dad for a long time, even before the baby was born. I never told you because I didn't want to worry you. I always thought I would just figure it out when the time came, but when she was born, I panicked. I didn't feel ready. And when I saw her, so different from what I expected, it felt like everything I was afraid of was staring me in the face. Emily sat there, absorbing his words. You're scared of being a father? She asked, her voice soft with understanding rather than judgment. Michael nodded, his expression vulnerable. Yeah, I'm terrified. I'm terrified of messing up, of not being the dad she needs me to be. And when I saw her, I don't know. I guess I was looking for an excuse to explain why I felt that way. Blaming her appearance was easier than facing my own fears. Emily reached out, taking his hand in hers. Michael, I'm scared too, she admitted. Being a parent is terrifying. There's so much we don't know, and yes, it's overwhelming. But we're in this together. We can't let fear or doubt tear us apart. Michael squeezed her hand, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. I'm sorry, Em. I'm so sorry for doubting you, for not trusting you when it mattered most. Emily smiled through her own tears. We'll get through this. But you have to trust me, and I have to trust you. We're a team. As they sat there, hands intertwined, a quiet understanding passed between them. The doubts and fears that had plagued them were still there, but now they had been brought into the light. And with that came the hope that, together, they could face whatever challenges came their way. Despite their conversation, Michael's internal conflict lingered. In the days that followed, he found himself lost in thought more often than not, replaying the events and emotions that had unfolded since their daughter's birth. He wanted to believe everything was behind them, but the nagging sense of unease wouldn't leave him. It wasn't just about the baby's appearance anymore. It was about what that moment had uncovered within him. One evening, as he sat on the porch watching the sun dip below the horizon, Michael found himself reflecting on his own upbringing. His father had been a strong, silent man, someone who rarely showed emotion, who believed that men should keep their fears and vulnerabilities hidden. Michael had followed that example for most of his life. But now, in the face of fatherhood, he realized how much it had shaped him. He didn't want to be like his father, distant, emotionally closed off. He wanted to be present, to be the kind of father his daughter deserved. But the weight of that responsibility was suffocating. Emily found him on the porch that evening, their daughter in her arms, swaddled and content after another feeding. She sat beside him, sensing that Michael was still struggling. "You're still thinking about it, aren't you?" she asked gently. Michael nodded, unable to hide the truth. "I'm trying not to, but yeah, I just can't shake this feeling, Em." Emily shifted their daughter in her arms and leaned into Michael, resting her head on his shoulder. "What are you feeling?" she asked, encouraging him to open up, something she knew wasn't easy for him. "I feel like I'm failing already," Michael admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "I keep thinking about everything I'm supposed to do as a dad, everything I don't know how to do. And when I saw her, I don't know. It's like it brought all my fears to the surface. I'm scared I won't be good enough for her." Emily listened, her heart aching for him. "Michael, you're already a good father," she said softly. "You're here. You're trying. That's more than enough right now. None of us know what we're doing at the start. We'll figure it out together, just like we always do." Michael swallowed hard, his throat tight with emotion. I don't want to let either of you down." "You won't," Emily assured him. "I know it's scary, but you don't have to be perfect. You just have to be present. That's what matters." Michael looked down at their daughter, her tiny face peaceful as she slept in Emily's arms. He reached out, gently stroking her soft cheek. "She deserves the best," he whispered. "And she'll get the best," Emily replied, smiling at him, "because she has you as her dad." For the first time since their daughter's birth, Michael felt a small sense of relief wash over him. The fear wasn't gone, but it felt more manageable now. He wasn't alone in this journey. He had Emily, and together, they could face the challenges ahead. He leaned down and kissed their daughter's forehead, feeling a surge of love and responsibility that was both daunting and beautiful. As they sat together on the porch, the quiet night wrapping around them, Michael finally began to believe that he could do this, that they could do this. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but with Emily by his side, he knew they would find their way. As the weeks passed, the tension between Michael and Emily slowly began to dissipate. There were still moments of uncertainty, of doubt creeping into Michael's thoughts late at night when their daughter cried out, or when he found himself alone with his fears. But gradually, he began to see the bigger picture. That fatherhood wasn't about perfection, it was about presence, about showing up every day with love and patience. One evening, after an exhausting day of balancing work and caring for their newborn, Michael sat in the rocking chair, cradling their daughter in his arms. Emily was resting in the bedroom, and for the first time since her birth, Michael found himself truly connecting with his daughter without the weight of doubt pressing down on him. As he rocked her gently, he whispered, "I'm sorry I ever doubted you. You're perfect, just the way you are." The baby cooed softly in response, her tiny hands grasping at his shirt. Michael smiled, feeling an overwhelming sense of peace. For the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to fully embrace the joy of fatherhood without the shadow of his earlier fears looming over him. He looked down at his daughter, studying her features, the same ones that had once filled him with confusion and doubt. Now, all he could see was the beauty in her, the connection to his family, to Emily, and to himself. Later that night, when Emily woke and found Michael still sitting in the nursery, she quietly approached him, watching the tender moment unfold. She could see the change in him, how the worry in his eyes had softened, how his posture had relaxed, as if he had finally come to terms with everything that had happened. She smiled and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. "You're a natural, you know that?" Emily whispered, sitting beside him. Michael looked up at her, his eyes filled with emotion. "I didn't think I'd feel this way. I was so scared, so caught up in my own head. But now, I look at her, and all I see is us. I don't care what she looks like. She's ours, and that's all that matters." Emily's eyes glistened with tears as she leaned in to kiss him softly on the cheek. "That's all I ever wanted, for you to see her the way I do. She's a part of both of us, Michael. She's our family." They sat there together, their daughter sleeping peacefully in Michael's arms, and in that quiet moment, the weight of the past few weeks seemed to melt away. The doubts, the fears, the tension, they all faded, replaced by a newfound sense of clarity and peace. The bond between them, once strained by uncertainty, had been strengthened by their willingness to confront their fears and vulnerabilities head-on. As they rocked their daughter to sleep, Michael felt an overwhelming sense of gratitude for Emily's patience, for their little girl, and for the journey they had traveled together. He realized that fatherhood wasn't about having all the answers from the start. It was about learning, growing, and accepting the unexpected with an open heart. From that night on, Michael no longer questioned his ability to be a good father or husband. The love he felt for his daughter was real and powerful, and that love would guide him through the challenges ahead. He had made peace with the unknown, and in doing so, had found the strength to move forward with his family, ready for whatever the future held. Months later, the air in their home was filled with laughter and warmth as Emily and Michael found their rhythm as parents. The early days of tension and doubt felt like distant memories, replaced by the joyful chaos of caring for their baby girl, whom they had named Lily. The small house that had once been so quiet was now alive with the sounds of giggles, late-night feedings, and playful coos. Michael had embraced fatherhood fully. Every morning, he would wake before the sun rose, taking over from Emily to give her a little extra rest. He would sit with Lily, holding her close as she giggled at the silly faces he made. Those moments, once filled with fear and uncertainty, had become the highlights of his day. He found peace in the routine, changing diapers, feeding her, and rocking her to sleep. He marveled at how much his daughter had grown in such a short time, how her personality had begun to shine through. One evening, as the family sat together on the couch, Lily resting between them, Michael turned to Emily with a smile. "You were right," he said softly. Emily looked at him, slightly confused. "About what?" "About everything," Michael replied, his voice filled with a quiet sincerity. "About trusting in the process, about us figuring it out together. I was so wrapped up in my own fears, I forgot that we're a team. I couldn't have done this without you." Emily smiled, her eyes softening as she reached out to take his hand. "I never doubted that you'd be an amazing dad, Michael. It just took you a little while to see it for yourself." Michael chuckled, glancing down at Lily, who was babbling happily, oblivious to the emotional weight of the conversation. "I guess I needed to trust myself a little more," he admitted. "But every time I look at her now, all I feel is love. It's hard to believe I ever questioned that." They sat there in silence for a moment, the weight of everything they had been through together sinking in. The doubt, the fear, the confrontation. It had all led them to this place, stronger and more connected than before. Their journey hadn't been easy, but it had been real, and they had faced it together. Emily leaned her head on Michael's shoulder, her voice soft as she spoke. "I think that's what being a parent is all about, isn't it? Not having all the answers, but learning along the way. We're going to make mistakes, we're going to have hard days, but as long as we're doing it together, I know we'll be okay." Michael kissed the top of her head, his heart swelling with gratitude for the life they had built together. "You're right," he whispered. "As long as we're together, we'll figure it out." As the sun set outside their window, casting a warm, golden glow across the room, Michael realized just how far they had come. The doubts that had once consumed him were now replaced with a quiet confidence, a deep understanding that fatherhood and life wasn't about being perfect. It was about showing up, loving fiercely and navigating the unknown together. In that moment, as he held his wife's hand and watched their daughter sleep peacefully between them, Michael knew that they had everything they needed: their love for each other, their commitment to their family, and the strength they had found in facing their challenges head-on. That was what would carry them forward, no matter what life threw their way. And in the quiet of their living room, surrounded by the warmth of their home and the love of their little family, Michael finally felt at peace. Leave a like, subscribe to the channel, turn on notifications, and watch this next story. It's truly emotional.